So, okay. So, while this is happening, while we are swiftly descending into insanity, and the government is openly flirting with the idea of outright ethnic cleansing, where are the U.S. Jewish groups? Where are those who claim to speak in the name of American Jews, who've, of course, never been elected by us, but who say that they are the representatives of Jewish people? Where is their, if they supposedly oppose racism, where are their voices now, needed more than ever? Well, there's a group called the Simon Wiesenthal Center. They name themselves after this Nazi hunter, and they claim to oppose racism, to police racism, in fact. And what do they do when we have the largest increase in anti-Semitism in decades, when you have Nazis openly marching in the streets of the United States and receiving tailwind from the White House? What do they do in response? No, they don't condemn Trump. Instead, they endorse him. They were the only Jewish group who actually came out to the inauguration and gave him a blessing, a benediction, if you can imagine that. Well, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, every year they issue their top 10, bottom 10, whatever you want to call it, their Kill a Jew list, I guess, their list of the 10 worst incidences of anti-Semitism in the world that year, in the previous year. So this is last year's list. Take a wild guess. Who do you think they ranked as the number one anti-Semite in the world last year? Well, it seems I can't. You guys have already gotten the picture. You know where we're going. Yes, number one, biggest anti-Semite, Obama and the United Nations. All right, double whammy. Number two, any ideas? The UK Labour Party. Labour Party in England. Number three, France, like the entire country of France. Okay? Number four, biggest anti-Semite in the world, BDS, okay, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement. And number five, only number five, actual Nazis. So this is how skewed their sense is of what's anti-Semitic and what's not anti-Semitic. These are the people that supposedly claim for themselves the right to determine this. Now, again, as I said, they do this every year. This is this past year. 2 years previous, they had also issued their list. And that year, actually, there was a horrific incident of anti-Semitism. This man, an American citizen, he walked into a Jewish community center in St. Louis, Missouri, with a machine gun, and he actually mowed down people. He murdered 3 people there. And, he wasn't embarrassed about it. He wasn't trying to hide it. He said outright, I wanted to make damn sure I killed some Jews before I died. So no question about his actions or his motives. Even when he got to court, he gave the Sieg Heil, the Heil Hitler salute. So if you can imagine, this man, according to the Simon Wiesenthal Center, merited the number 7 ranking of world's biggest anti-Semites that year. He was number 7. The number 4 biggest anti-Semite in the world, according to the Simon Wiesenthal Center, was this man, the man speaking to you right now. And how the hell did that happen? If you can imagine this, just days after they announced, the worst examples of the evilest people on the planet, then they had a gala dinner to celebrate who the people they say are the greatest people on the planet, the biggest humanitarians. And the person they named their humanitarian of the year that year was none other than this man, Harvey Weinstein. This man who's now been accused of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape by, are we still on double digits or have we now reached triple digits? I thought we were already at 90, but I could be wrong. But in any case, dozens and dozens of women accusing him of sex crimes. This is the man who the Simon Wiesenthal Center saw as their greatest humanitarian, of course, only because he donated some money to them. Now, when he was receiving his award, he gave a little speech there, and what he said was, we are going to have to get as organized as the mafia. There's got to be a way to fight back. We better stand up and kick these guys in the ass, talking about these people that the Simon Wiesenthal Center says are the world's biggest anti-Semites, including me. So I'm just trying to get this straight. So are you saying you're going to cut my ear off like in Reservoir Dogs, or are you going to gouge my eyeballs out like in your film Kill Bill, or do you have plans to bash my head in like in Glorious Bastards? How did we get to the point where the most powerful man in Hollywood is threatening me with physical violence? I was kind of dumbfounded by all this, and then poking around, I realized that it had actually started several months earlier when I was in the U.S. Giving lectures just like this. Then I was speaking at Harvard Law, and then at that very moment, this group, Im Tirtzu, a fascist Israeli group, and okay, look, we have this tendency on the left to call anyone to the right of us fascist, I'll admit, but this group actually is fascist. After they, there was a group of Israeli leftists who parodied them, and they started a webpage on Facebook, Im Tirtzu Tnua Fashistit Zyesh, translated to English, is Im Tirtzu a fascist movement? It is. So they posted this on Facebook, and then the group Im Tirtzu was outraged. How dare you call us fascists? We're no fascists. And they sued them for libel, saying, you've libeled us by saying this. It got to court, and the Israeli judge said, well, you kind of are fascist. And so he dismissed the suit. So even by an Israeli standard, they are actually fascists. So this group, Im Tirtzu, they issued this report. At that moment that I'm in the U.S. giving lectures, they issued this report, March 2014, and the report lists a group of these 10 or 12 Israelis who at that time were in the United States speaking about what's happening back in Israel. Kind of the whistleblowers, those Israelis speaking out critically against the government. And so it lists me there, and there's a little dossier on me, these McCarthyist tactics trying to vilify us. So they write about me. David Sheen, he was an editor and reporter at Haaretz. That's true. David Sheen, he authored this report to the United Nations about Israel's treatment of African refugees. That's also true. And then they write, why is David Sheen such an anti-Semite? Because on his website, he has this graphic comparing Eli Yishai, an Israeli minister, and Adolf Hitler. So, okay, first of all, I didn't call anyone a soup Nazi. I didn't call anyone a feminazi or a grammar Nazi. And I also didn't quote anything out of context. This is an actual quote from Hitler from the New York newspaper, the Staatszeitung, which was the largest German language newspaper published in New York City at that time in 1933. Hitler came to America on a visit and gave an interview to this German language newspaper, and this is what he said. We'll look at the original in Hebrew or in English, and I'll zoom in so you can see it. This is, quote, I ask the American people, are you prepared to receive in your midst these well-poisoners of the German people and the universal spirit of Christianity? We would willingly give every one of them a free steamer ticket and a 1,000 mark note for traveling expenses if we could get rid of them. That's Hitler in 1933. Now, Interior Minister Eli Yishai in 2012. Why don't the bleeding hearts criticizing me take dozens of infiltrators and settle them in their neighborhoods? Whoever comes to the immigration offices will receive a plane ticket and a stipend of 1,000 euros, with which they can live in their country for a long time. Whoever doesn't come will be caught, jailed, and deported with no stipend. So, saying that this group of people, they're of a different ethnicity, that we hate them and we want them gone, and we are willing to buy them a ticket to get out the country, and even down to the same number, the same financial figure of what he's willing to bribe them to leave the country. Now, the difference is that these things actually came true. Eli Yishai didn't just say these words, he actually put them into practice. They tried to smear me, saying, oh, David Sheen, how could you make this comparison? How could you be so critical? It wasn't just words. He then put it into practice. He proposed this policy. The government accepted it. They implemented it. In the policy, he writes, Rikuz kol hamistanenim. They're not even embarrassed anymore to use the same language. Concentration of all the infiltrators. And sure enough, in the last 5 years since this report was established, they carried out the policy, which was to round African refugees, that's the group he was talking about, to round thousands of African refugees into these detention centers, the largest detention center of its kind in the world, I should add, and with the objective of making their lives miserable. Making their lives so miserable that realizing, well, I guess I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. And with no other option, many thousands, tens of thousands of African refugees since had felt that they had no choice and accepted this bursary and left the country, went back to Africa, and then became refugees once again and had to flee for their lives all over again. And in this way, Netanyahu has ethnically cleansed between a third and almost a half of the African refugee population of the country. People weren't listening to me anymore because now David Sheen's an anti-Semite, so let's not hear what he has to say. And so they achieved their objective. The Im Tirtzu group got their objective. People weren't listening to David Sheen, and all these 5 years, in the last 5 years, Israel's been ethnically cleansing the country of African refugees, and no one was paying attention. The media wasn't doing its job, and that group that authored that report, it's not that they were neutral standing on the side or something. The whole time they've been demanding that the Africans be ethnically cleansed. They've been protesting, and this is, I photographed the author of that report at one of these anti-African race rallies, and this is what they've been doing. They've been demanding that the government kick out black folks, and they have. They've listened to them, and they've done what they've asked. And these groups are super tight with Netanyahu. Like, they're hand in glove. It's not that they're acting independently. They're gongos, government-organized NGOs. And these groups that persecute Africans in the street to make their lives so miserable that they eventually feel there's no choice but to leave. Again, in the new normal, right, when the mask falls, Netanyahu now meets with them openly, publicly, even invites them into his government meetings, these ultra-racists. And so now, if you can imagine this, Netanyahu said, okay, well, 5 years, we've managed to ethnically cleanse these 25,000 African refugees. Now, from now on, we're not even going to bribe them. We're not even going to offer them money to go. We're not even going to immiserate them so that they give up and go. From now on, we're just going to kick them out. This is the new normal. So, the whole thing was, they said I was an anti-Semite, and so because that year I spoke at the Bundestag, I was invited to speak in the German parliament. So because this man, David Sheen, who is a Jew hater, spoke in the German parliament, that was the biggest or fourth biggest anti-Semitic incident of the year, they wrote. Okay. But it's instructive to listen to what I said in the Bundestag. Of course, it was videotaped. It's all online on YouTube. You can just search for it and find out and hear what I had to say. And I stand behind every word I said there. And essentially, what happened was German legislators, they heard some kind of a similar presentation from me talking about racism in Israeli society. And then they asked me afterwards, what can we do about this? We want to help make peace possible between Israelis and Palestinians. How can we do so? We're talking to the Labour Party, and I'm like, well, that's your problem. You're talking to the Labour Party. There's virtually no difference between Labour and Likud. It's merely a matter of lip service, perhaps, but in practice, their policies are nearly identical. And instead of just talking to the religious Zionists and the secular Zionists and the liberal Zionists, you need to start talking to the non-Zionists. No, don't only speak to the Zionists, okay? And start speaking to the Palestinian parties. Start speaking to the Palestinian politicians and parliamentarians and hear what they have to say. And I'm not saying that they were waiting on my every word or anything, but just so happens that half a year after I made that speech, the German foreign minister made an official state visit to the country, and he actually had a public meeting with the head of the Palestinian party in the Israeli Knesset, with Ayman Odeh.